Hey guys, tonight we're wandering through palace corridors at night, where the royal mistresses of old found themselves alone, surrounded not only by the scent of burning beeswax candles and the shuffle of guards' boots, but also by the heavy weight of their own solitude. You might imagine velvet curtains and perfumed pillows as a recipe for bliss, but in truth, the halls were drafty, the stone walls echoed with gossip, and the mistresses had to find all sorts of clever ways to endure those long, kingless nights. And yes, if you had been plopped into one of those gilded cages, you probably wouldn't survive the mix of boredom, politics, and passive-aggressive chambermaids. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far and wide these little bedtime wanderings travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The corridor stretches ahead of you, lined with flickering torches that barely hold back the shadows. The palace is supposed to be alive with banquets, laughter, and the clinking of goblets, but at this hour it feels more like a monastery, silent, echoing, and faintly eerie. You pad along the stone floor in soft slippers, passing servants who pretend not to notice you. Everyone knows you are the king's favorite, but everyone also knows favorites don't last forever. That thought hovers, ghost-like, above every whispered conversation behind closed doors. What strikes you most is the contrast. During the day, these halls are buzzing with noise, gossip, and perfume strong enough to make your head spin. But at night, all that grandeur strips away. What remains is stone, silence, and you, an ornament no one has the courage to speak openly to. The French court under Louis XVI, for instance, was notorious for its intricate rituals. Yet even his famed mistress Madame de Pompadour spent many lonely nights wandering through endless hallways, her mind busy with poetry and politics while the king attended to matters of state, or simply to someone else. Historians still argue whether her greatest power came from her beauty or her intellect, but either way, the image of her in brocade slippers, packing quietly through the palace at Versailles, reminds you that mistresses were both exalted and isolated. Your footsteps echo, and you wonder if the guards stationed along the walls ever pity you. Probably not. To them, you are part of the spectacle, like a jewel on display. Yet you sense their eyes tracking you as you pass. That sharp awareness, being observed, judged, envied, never really leaves, even in solitude. The hallways carry stories in their very stones. Some whisper of mistresses who fell from grace, vanishing overnight when their beauty faded or when a rival appeared. One quirky tidbit often retold in hushed voices is how Anne Boleyn, before she became queen, was rumored to pace similar corridors in Henry VII's palaces, her mind filled not only with ambition, but also with restless nights of uncertainty. Did she stroke the cold walls for comfort? Did she count the tapestries like you count sheep? No one knows, but you feel her shadow here nonetheless. You pass a gilded mirror hanging in the corridor, its surface warped slightly by time. Candlelight flickers across your reflection, and for a moment you don't quite recognize yourself. That's the peculiar thing about solitude, it distorts, just like that mirror. You begin to question not only how others see you, but also how you see yourself. You straighten your silk robe, fuss with a jewel at your throat, as if the mirror were a rival rather than a reflection. And then just as you start to feel entirely alone, the faint sound of voices drifts from behind a carved oak door. Servants gossiping, most likely. They speak of you, of course. Mistresses were as much the fuel of rumor as they were of romance. You pause, straining to catch words, but all you get are fragments. Her dress, the king, tonight, your cheeks flush with irritation. You could burst in and remind them who you are, but what good would it do? Power doesn't silence whispers, it only multiplies them. So you keep walking, letting the torches guide you. The air grows cooler as you move deeper into the wing reserved for favorites. Your room waits at the far end, its heavy door carved with scenes of hunting and triumph. You always found it ironic that doors to women's chambers bore such masculine imagery, as if reminding you that your presence here is permitted only through the favor of a man. Still, you are not powerless. You've noticed how corridors act like veins, carrying not only servants but also information. By pausing at certain corners, you catch bits of conversation. By befriending a chambermaid, you hear which noble is scheming against you. In this way, the empty hall becomes your stage, your secret listening post. One fringe story whispered among scholars is that certain mistresses actually etched tiny marks into the stone at favored listening spots, so they'd remember where sound carried best. Imagine that, little chalk symbols hidden under centuries of polish, telling future wanderers where secrets once flowed. Historians still argue whether these markings truly belonged to mistresses or were merely maintenance signs left by servants. But it's a delicious thought, isn't it? That a lonely woman in a silk robe once leaned against this wall, carving a discreet sign to remind herself where gossip trickled most clearly. The corridor opens into a gallery filled with moonlight streaming through tall windows. Here, solitude turns from suffocating to sublime. You press your forehead against the cool glass and gaze out at the courtyard. Lanterns flicker, and somewhere a fountain trickles faintly. It's peaceful, so peaceful you almost believe this solitude is a gift rather than a punishment. Almost. But then a bat flits past the window, startling you. You laugh under your breath. Life in the palace teaches you to expect drama, yet sometimes it comes in the shape of a tiny winged intruder rather than a scheming duke. That's the strange comedy of solitude. You scare yourself with shadows, then laugh because no one is around to see. By the time you return to your chamber, you've walked the same halls mistresses before you walked. Women of France, Spain, England, Italy. Each carried her own burden of beauty, ambition, and longing. Some prayed as they walked, others plotted. Some simply let their thoughts drift until dawn. And now you add your footsteps to that long, echoing lineage. One more mistress tracing a lonely path through gilded corridors. You slip inside your room, close the heavy door, and lean against it. The hall beyond fades back into silence, but its echoes stay with you. Tonight, as on so many nights, solitude has been your companion, an invisible partner packing beside you, reminding you that behind all the glitter, you are still just a figure moving through stone and shadow. The chamber door shuts behind you with a soft thud, and suddenly the grand hush of the palace presses in. You are alone. No musicians strumming in the corner, no king sprawled on your bed with half a smile, no courtiers pretending to like you for the sake of proximity to power. Only you, the smell of candle smoke, and the weight of a chamber stuffed with velvet and silence. And that's when it strikes you. A royal mistress may have the world's finest gowns and jewels, yet she lives in what can only be called a gilded cage. The bed is massive, the canopy embroidered with golden thread, but without company it feels less like a nest and more like a cavern. The tapestries are stories of glory and triumph, knights on horseback and saints ascending, but tonight they look down like mute witnesses, reminding you of the expectations tethered to your position. You're adored when the king is there, but once he leaves, even for just one night, you're reduced to waiting, packing, existing in an empty chamber. Louis XIV's mistress, Madame de Montespan, famously quipped that she lived in luxury fit for a queen, with the loneliness of a nun. And you can't help but feel that. Historians still argue whether Montespan relished her solitude as a chance to plot her political maneuvers, or whether she dreaded those stretches when her rival might be gaining the king's favor while she counted the minutes alone. Either way, solitude in such a place feels less like rest and more like suspension, hanging between power and oblivion. The gilded cage metaphor isn't just poetic, it's literal. The furniture, gilded with gold leaf, gleams under candlelight but offers no warmth. Chairs are stiff, meant for display rather than comfort. The gilded candelabras glow, but they make you aware of the dark corners creeping in. In this palace world, even the windows are barred, not with iron, but with layers of etiquette, expectation, and scrutiny. You are free to walk the corridors, free to summon attendants, free to indulge in luxuries, but never free to leave without permission or consequence. You glance at the door again, half-hoping someone will knock. A handmaiden perhaps, or a servant bringing some excuse for company. But nothing comes. That's when loneliness settles like dust. It sneaks in quietly, layering over every surface until it seems part of the room. Some mistresses fought this loneliness by drowning themselves in chatter. Others, like Diane de Poitiers, Henry II's famed mistress, turned inward. One quirky tidbit preserved in letters suggests she used her solitary evenings to concoct elaborate beauty rituals, including bathing in mixtures of gold-infused water. Scholars still debate whether this was true or just court gossip designed to magnify her mystique, but it paints a vivid picture. A woman in her 50s, alone in her chambers, soaking in golden baths while outside the palace buzzed with dances and feasts. Imagine the mix of glamour and emptiness that carried. You shift restlessly on your bed, feeling the weight of expectation press into your shoulders. You are supposed to be content, even grateful. After all, countless courtiers would claw their way to this position. Yet here you are, the chosen one, fiddling with a pearl bracelet and wondering if anyone in the entire palace truly cares whether you are happy. This is the paradox of being a mistress, surrounded by abundance but starved of freedom. When the king's presence fades, so does your purpose, and what's left is a gnawing question. Who are you without him? You might be clever, witty, well-read, but the palace doesn't see you as an individual. You are an accessory, a living adornment for the king's ego. The loneliness also carries risk. With too much empty time, minds wander into dangerous territory. Some women turn to letter writing, pouring out their frustration in coded words, careful never to leave traces that might be used against them. Others took up small hobbies, embroidery, sketching, even collecting rare herbs for little superstitions. Still, the gilded cage remained a cage. You lean back against the pillows, staring at the canopy overhead, and wonder how many women before you stared at that exact embroidered lion, feeling equally caged. Maybe some found strength in solitude, turning it into a kind of armor. Maybe others broke under it, their loneliness feeding their paranoia until whispers of poison and betrayal seemed like the only logical end. Historians still argue whether certain scandals, like the infamous affair of the poisons in Louis XIV's France, were born from genuine malice or simply the toxic cocktail of jealousy and isolation. And here's the quiet joke of it. You have more luxury than 99% of people in the kingdom, yet you find yourself counting the cracks in the gilding, the way ordinary people count cracks in their ceilings. You're not alone in that irony. Palace walls may be plated with gold, but they ring just as hollow as any peasant's hut when no one shares the space. The candles flicker low, shadows stretch longer, and still you wait. The gilded cage holds fast, gleaming, beautiful, and utterly suffocating. You sit upright, unable to bear the silence any longer, and your eyes drift toward the small writing desk by the window. It's a delicate thing, inlaid with mother of pearl, and far too fragile to withstand the pounding frustration that sometimes builds in you. But tonight, it calls like a refuge. If solitude cages your body, then perhaps the quill can free your mind. You cross the room, silk slippers whispering across the rugs, and settle at the desk. Outside, the moon stains the courtyard silver. Inside, the candle's glow makes your ink shimmer like spilled wine. And here at last is where so many mistresses discovered a private world, the world of books, letters, and the written word. Reading and writing were, after all, luxuries in themselves. Many noblewomen were taught just enough to manage estates or pen polite correspondence, but mistresses often went further. You imagine Madame de Pompadour at Versailles, arranging her personal library of over 3,000 volumes. She didn't just read them, she devoured them, annotating margins, scribbling witty commentary, and using their words to sharpen her wit for courtly debates. Historians still argue whether her intellectual pursuits genuinely impressed the king or merely gave her ammunition to maintain influence. Either way, she proves that in solitude, books became both a solace and a weapon. You dip your quill and start a letter, not to anyone in particular, but to yourself. The words tumble out, confessions you'd never dare speak, frustrations too sharp for polite ears, little barbs aimed at rivals who strut the halls in silk gowns. It's a dangerous game, this private writing. Letters have a way of escaping into the world, carried by nosy maids or intercepted by enemies. One quirky tidbit preserved in Tudor lore suggests that Henry VII's mistresses sometimes wrote letters in lemon juice, visible only when warmed by a candle flame. Invisible ink, centuries before espionage became fashionable. Imagine the thrill of a secret message appearing like a ghost upon parchment. You pause, tapping the feather against your chin. What do you even long to write? That you miss the king? That his absence gnaws at you? Or perhaps that you relish the hours alone when you can be yourself without performing charm and allure? You smile at the absurdity. If anyone ever found such words, they'd either brand you lovesick or dangerously indifferent. There's no safe middle ground. So instead, you turn to poetry. A verse about the moon. A stanza about roses wilting without water. It sounds trite, but in these walls, trite is safer than truth. You scratch out a couplet, then lean back, letting the rhythm soothe your restless mind. You imagine other women in other palaces, doing the same. Anne Boleyn writing French poems in her chambers, Catherine de Medici scribbling marginalia in books of astrology. Words become companions, even conspirators, when flesh and blood company is lacking. Books themselves hold their own comfort. You open a worn volume of Ovid's Metamorphoses, the Latin lines swimming before your eyes. It's a favorite of many mistresses. After all, it brims with stories of transformation, desire, and power. You let the tale of Daphne turning into a laurel tree blur into your own story, a woman escaping pursuit by becoming something untouchable. Historians still debate how much women at court truly identified with these classical myths, but the parallels are almost too tempting to ignore. And then there are letters unsent, the ones you fold, tuck into drawers, and never deliver. Entire conversations with the king play out this way, each word sharp, polished, ready for battle. In real life, you bite your tongue and smile at the right moment. On paper, you let the fury spill. And when you're done, you tear the sheet to shreds, feeding it to the fire before anyone can glimpse your raw honesty. One night, you draft a letter not to the king, but to yourself 20 years from now. You write of how you feel tonight, lonely, restless, but oddly alive in the quiet. You imagine your future self laughing at these words, or perhaps crying. It's a small act of rebellion, claiming your own narrative in a world that prefers you silent. Of course, you can't help but chuckle at the thought. A royal mistress scribbling in candlelight while outside the palace pulses with feasts and music. It's almost comic, like sneaking spinach while everyone else gorges on roast peacock. But here's the strange comfort. The written word doesn't judge. It doesn't gossip. It doesn't vanish with the king's moods. It stays as long as you guard it. You close the book at last, stack your papers, and blow gently on the ink to dry it. The chamber is still silent, but now it feels different, less like a cage, more like a library. Words have filled the empty air, and for a brief while, solitude has turned into companionship. The silence hangs heavy again, but this time you don't go to the writing desk. Instead, your hand drifts toward the lute propped casually against the chair, its polished wood gleaming faintly in the candlelight. The strings hum faintly as you lift it, like a living creature eager to break the hush. You smile. Music is one of the few companions you can summon instantly, without fear of betrayal, without the sting of gossip. You pluck a string and the note vibrates across the chamber. For a moment, the whole palace seems to pause. The echo twines with the crackle of the fire and you feel less alone. You strum again, experimenting with melody, and soon your fingers find a rhythm that fits the mood. Soft, unhurried, tinged with melancholy. Mistresses throughout history relied on music in precisely these moments. Madame de Pompadour adored the arts. She not only performed in courtly plays, but also sponsored composers. Historians still argue whether she truly possessed skill, or whether courtiers simply pretended to admire her talents to flatter the king. Either way, when she sat with her harpsichord, she carved out a pocket of independence, a realm where she didn't have to be mistress, hostess, or strategist, just a woman immersed in sound. You too lose yourself in the vibration of strings. The music builds a shield around you, invisible but palpable. For a while, the chatter beyond the walls, the suspicion in rival glances, even the absence of the king, all of it recedes. There is only you, your hands, and the song unfolding in real time. You hum along, hesitant at first. Your voice startles you. It's been so long since you've allowed yourself to sing freely. During feasts, you've offered polite verses, carefully controlled to charm. But here alone, you let the notes wobble, rise, and fall. The sound is raw, a little imperfect, but strangely comforting. One quirky tidbit often buried in court records is that several royal mistresses trained in secret with court musicians. They weren't supposed to. Singing and playing instruments were often seen as accomplishments for courtiers, not for women meant to embody silent allure. Yet more than one mistress bribed or befriended a musician to sneak in private lessons. Imagine the thrill, meeting in shadowy alcoves, learning fingering techniques by candlelight, the soft reprimands when a string buzzed. It wasn't merely about art. It was about agency, a small slice of control in a life dictated by someone else. You wonder how many of those secret notes drifted into the night, carrying confessions no diary could hold. Perhaps Anne Boleyn, who grew up in the French court, sang chansons under her breath as she waited in lonely chambers. Historians still argue whether her musical talents contributed to her allure, but the idea of her whispering verses into the air makes the loneliness almost romantic. The lute grows heavier in your arms, the sound deepening as you press harder on the strings. The tune shifts, becoming playful now, a rebellion against the solemnity of the night. You laugh under your breath when a note twangs off-key, startling you like a hiccup. That's the beauty of solitude. Your mistakes are yours alone. No courtiers sneering, no rivals smirking behind fans. Just you, embracing the imperfection. And then, as the melody steadies again, you feel something else stir. Memory. The last time the king visited, he praised your voice in front of half the court, calling you his nightingale. You rolled your eyes inwardly at the cliché, but part of you glowed nonetheless. Tonight, you reclaim the nickname, not as his nightingale, but as your own. The song belongs to you, not to the role you play. Sometimes the music draws others unexpectedly. A maid lingering at the door, pretending to tidy while really listening. A guard shifting his weight, tapping his spear in rhythm. You've noticed it before. Sound travels further than you intend. That's its danger and its gift. For every rival who might mock, there's another soul soothed by your tune. One curious story floats from the Habsburg court. A mistress of Emperor Rudolf II was said to lull herself to sleep with a tiny portable clavichord. Neighbors swore the melodies drifted through the stone walls, calming even the restless emperor in distant rooms. Whether the tale is true or just palace folklore, it illustrates how music turns private moments into shared atmosphere, dissolving walls, if only briefly. You set the lute aside at last, strings still vibrating faintly in the air. Your chest feels lighter, your mind clearer. The loneliness hasn't disappeared, but it has transformed. Instead of weighing you down, it hums with a rhythm, like a heartbeat reminding you that solitude doesn't equal silence. The chamber returns to its quiet self, yet the echoes of song linger. You stretch out on the bed, humming softly, and realize that while you may be caged in gold, your voice can still slip through the bars. Tonight, music has been your accomplice, your confessor, and your balm. And tomorrow, should the solitude return, as it surely will, you'll know exactly where to reach. For the strings, for the notes, for the sound that makes the walls listen. You rise from the bed and wander toward the tall mirror, its gilt frame twisting with carved cherubs and vines. The reflection that greets you is both comforting and cruel. There you are, draped in silk, yet with shadows under your eyes, hair slightly out of place, lips parched from the dry palace air. And suddenly the thought strikes. If you cannot command company tonight, you will command your own image. The chamber smells faintly of rosewater and beeswax, scents that cling to every court lady, but tonight you decide to deepen them with your own rituals. You pull open a carved chest filled with bottles, jars, and little pots, your arsenal against time, boredom, and the faint terror of being replaced. A mistress without beauty is like a knight without armor, and in these moments of solitude, beauty rituals are not vanity, they are survival. You pour a splash of lavender water into a basin, dipping your hands and feeling the cool relief. The skin tingles, and you imagine the lavender soothing not only your flesh but your nerves. You dab rose oil onto your temples, letting the fragrance rise around you like a private cloud. Suddenly, the chamber feels less like a cage and more like a boudoir, transformed by scent and touch. Historical accounts brim with tales of such solitary indulgences. Diane de Poitiers was said to apply gold-infused potions, believing they preserved her youthful glow well into her 60s. Historians still argue whether her radiance came from alchemy or from sheer discipline. Daily horse rides, careful diets, endless rituals. What's clear is that her solitude was never wasted. She used it to polish the weapon of appearance, the only armor that could guarantee her continued place at court. You pluck a tiny pot of ceruse powder, white lead mixed with vinegar, a deadly concoction that women of your station dusted onto their faces for that coveted pale glow. The danger is half the point. Beauty itself is dangerous, and court life thrives on risks dressed up as elegance. You press the powder lightly onto your cheeks, watching your reflection smooth into something almost otherworldly. Alone, you can take your time, experimenting with shades, with the angle of your brows, with the curl of your lashes. You are your own painter, your face the canvas. A quirky tidbit survives from Elizabethan England. Some women applied a paste of pigeon droppings to soften their skin. Imagine the absurdity. You, mistress of the king, swathed in pearls, quietly smearing bird waste across your face in the name of beauty. Scholars chuckle about it now, but at the time, it was deadly serious. Solitude gave women the privacy to apply such questionable treatments without scandal. You lean closer to the mirror, tracing the line of your lips. Red pigment made from crushed cochineal beetles sits waiting in a tiny jar. You dab it on, watching your mouth bloom into the color of pomegranates. The gesture feels intimate, even sensual, though no one is here to see. Perhaps that's the point. When the king is away, you must remind yourself of your own allure, not for him, but for you. The process slows your breathing, steadies your thoughts. Each stroke of the brush, each dab of oil is like meditation. The solitude, once heavy, becomes productive. You remember Madame de Pompadour again, how she was said to spend hours each evening on elaborate coiffures, even commissioning a personal hairdresser to invent new styles weekly. Historians still debate whether these hours were wasted vanity or strategic artistry, but there's little doubt she found comfort in the ritual itself. Your hands wander next to a small ivory comb. You drag it through your hair, untangling the day's chaos. The repetitive motion soothes you, each pull releasing another thread of tension. You recall an old superstition. Brushing your hair 100 strokes each night will ensure not only shine but also pleasant dreams. You count softly, losing yourself in the rhythm, as though weaving a spell of protection against loneliness. And here comes the quiet humor of it all, you, trapped in a palace brimming with jewels and feasts, resorting to the same little rituals that any washerwoman might cherish before sleep. Wash, brush, soothe. The difference lies not in the act, but in the bottles of imported oils, the gilded mirror, the servants who fetched ingredients from across oceans. When at last you step back, your reflection has transformed. Not entirely, your eyes still carry the softness of solitude, but you look less like a caged bird and more like a queen of your own small realm. You smile faintly. Beauty rituals may not erase loneliness, but they create a buffer, a layer of confidence, a whispered reminder. I still hold power, if only over myself. You cap the bottles, close the chest, and return to the bed, your skin glowing faintly in the candlelight. Tonight, You are your own audience, your own admirer, and in the quiet, that is enough. The air in the chamber feels thick, heavy with perfume and candle smoke, so you slip into a silk cloak and ease open the door. Tonight the corridors don't call to you, the gardens do. You know the risk. Wandering the palace grounds alone can earn whispers, or worse, the notice of rivals eager to paint you as reckless. But solitude has a way of drawing you outdoors, toward the cool breath of the night. Your slippers crunch softly on gravel as you step into the moonlit garden. The palace looms behind you like a silent giant, but here among the hedges and fountains, you feel lighter. Mistresses throughout history found the same refuge in gardens, walled oases where solitude could shift from punishment to pleasure. The air is alive with night scents, jasmine climbing along trellises, roses closing their petals for sleep, the faint tang of damp earth. You inhale deeply, a luxury denied during banquets where the stench of roasted meats and sweating courtiers overwhelms everything. Here, the scents belong to you alone. The gardens whisper secrets the palace walls cannot. You wander toward a marble bench tucked beneath a yew arch. The stone is cool against your palms, grounding you. Above, the moon paints the fountain silver. The trickle of water competes only with the rustle of leaves. You imagine how many mistresses sat in similar gardens, seeking the same solace. Diane de Poitiers was known to favor twilight walks, her pale gowns glowing ghost-like as she paced the paths of Chenonceau. Historians still argue whether she walked for exercise, for reflection, or simply to be seen by the right eyes in the right light. Either way, she understood that gardens offered more than greenery. They offered stagecraft. But alone, you stage yourself for no one. You tilt your head back, staring at constellations. How many women before you wished on those same stars? One quirky tidbit from French court lore claims that mistresses sometimes plucked particular flowers under moonlight, believing their dew held magical properties to preserve beauty or guarantee fidelity. Superstition or not, you feel the temptation. You reach for a bloom, fingertips brushing its petals, and imagine bottling its essence for strength. The garden hums with possibilities. Each path could be a retreat or a risk. Some mistresses use these solitary strolls for clandestine meetings, slipping love notes to allies or arranging secret encounters. You tread slowly, half expecting a shadow to emerge, but tonight the solitude is pure. No whispers, no footsteps, only you and the night. A hedgehog rustles in the bushes, startling you into laughter. That's the absurdity of solitude outdoors. You brace for scandalous encounters, only to find yourself face to face with a harmless creature. You crouch, watching it nose through the leaves and realize you're smiling in earnest. This is what solitude can offer, not just melancholy, but unexpected playfulness. You pause at the fountain, trailing fingers through the cold water. Reflections ripple, a distorted version of yourself, pale and wavering. It reminds you of the way your role wavers too, depending on who watches. With the king, you are dazzling. With courtiers, you are dangerous. With yourself in this moonlit garden, you are something softer, a woman searching for balance. Historians still debate whether gardens at royal residences were truly private or subtly monitored by spies and guards. The truth likely lies in between. You glance over your shoulder, half expecting eyes behind the hedge. If they are there, let them see you like this, quiet, contemplative human. It's better than being seen packing your chamber like a trapped bird. The walk stretches on. You follow the gravel paths through labyrinthine hedges, past statues of gods frozen in triumphant poses. You linger by a marble Venus, her smooth form bathed in moonlight, and feel both kinship and rivalry. She is perfection carved in stone. You are flesh that ages. That thought gnaws at you, but you push it aside, focusing instead on the soft grass beneath your slippered feet. One curious tale lingers in your mind. Catherine de Medici supposedly ordered special poison gardens, filled with rare and deadly plants she studied in secret. Some scholars argue this was an exaggeration by her enemies, but the legend persists. You chuckle at the thought of yourself tending a bed of poisonous herbs under the moonlight, What a delicious scandal that would make for the gossips. Still, you prefer roses tonight. Eventually, the cool air chills your skin and you pull the cloak tighter around you. You've wandered far enough. As you turn back toward the palace, you feel calmer, more centered. Solitude in your chamber had felt suffocating. Solitude in the garden feels expansive, like your soul could stretch its arms. You slip through the door, closing it softly behind you. The palace swallows you again, but you carry the garden with you, the scent of jasmine in your hair, the memory of moonlight on stone, the comfort of knowing that solitude can bloom, not just wither. The garden still lingers in your senses when you return, but you're not entirely alone. In the corner of your chamber sits a small figure, hands folded neatly, eyes lowered as soon as yours meet hers. A handmaiden waiting. She knows when to vanish into the background and when to step forward with a candle or a cloak. Tonight, her presence reminds you of one of the strangest truths about being a royal mistress. Solitude was never absolute. Even in the loneliest hours, there were always eyes nearby, ears that carried stories further than you would ever intend. Still, among those eyes and ears, some belonged to confidants rather than spies. Mistresses often clung to trusted servants with desperate loyalty. You imagine whispers traded while brushing hair, secrets murmured in the dim hours before dawn, laughter spilling out when the corridors were empty enough to be safe. These women were more than attendants. They were shields, companions, and sometimes co-conspirators. You watch your handmaiden pour warm water into a basin, the steam curling upward. She says nothing, but you can feel the quiet bond between you. In history, similar bonds reshaped courts. Take Madame de Pompadour, whose closest servant was said to keep her informed of gossip long before it reached the king's ears. Historians still argue whether this was deliberate espionage or simply the natural byproduct of a servant listening too closely. Either way, Pompadour used those whispers like weapons. But in the private hours, those same servants became confidants of another kind. Imagine mistresses weeping into a maid's lap when the king's affection cooled, or laughing with them about absurdly pompous courtiers. One quirky record from the Tudor court mentions Anne Boleyn's maids joining her in singing bawdy songs while she played the lute, the sound leaking into the corridor and scandalizing passers-by. Solitude, when shared with a trusted servant, often took on an entirely different flavor. You pace the chamber, cloak trailing, and your handmaiden follows with her eyes but not her feet. She knows when to keep her distance. That delicate awareness, how close to stand, when to speak, what not to repeat, was survival for women in her position. And for you, her silence feels like companionship. Solitude is bearable when someone else holds it quietly with you. Of course, trust was risky. You've heard the stories. Servants bribed to betray secrets, maids slipping notes to political rivals, companions who turned into informants. Catherine Howard, Henry VII's doomed young queen, was undone in part because her ladies-in-waiting betrayed her confidences under interrogation. That fear gnaws at you, even now. You glance at your handmaiden and wonder, what would it take for her loyalty to crumble? A purse of coins, a promise of marriage from a courtier, the safety of her family. Historians still debate the true loyalty of certain famous attendants, whether they were genuine companions or simply pawns in larger games. But you decide, for tonight, to imagine your maid as loyal, unshakable, a keeper of secrets too fragile to be spoken aloud to anyone else. You imagine leaning close, confessing the ache of waiting hours for a king who never arrives, admitting the small vanities and insecurities that weigh heavier than your jeweled hairpins. She would nod, understanding. She might even offer her own story, her own ache of solitude from a life lived in your shadow. It strikes you that servants had their own strange isolation, always near, yet never allowed to be equal. They knew you more intimately than anyone, what you ate, how you smelled, which side you preferred to sleep on, yet could never claim friendship openly. Their devotion existed in the quiet margins of history, rarely recorded, yet deeply felt. You sit at your dressing table, and your handmaiden begins to brush your hair. Each stroke is rhythmic, soothing. The brush drags through the tangles gently, and you find yourself closing your eyes. How many mistresses throughout time found comfort in this simple ritual? The intimacy of touch without judgment, the sense of being cared for when the king's care was absent. One odd tidbit floats into your memory. In some courts, mistresses would deliberately share false secrets with their attendants to test loyalty, watching to see if the tale made its way back through the gossip chain. Imagine that little game, setting bait in your solitude, measuring devotion by silence. You consider doing the same with your own maid, but the thought feels cruel. Tonight, you want to believe in her. You speak softly, half to yourself. Do you think the king thinks of me when he is away? She doesn't answer directly, she wouldn't dare, but her pause in brushing, her gentle hand smoothing your hair tells you all you need. She understands the question beneath the words, and in that silence you feel less alone. The hours drift. You and your handmaiden share the space like two candles flickering beside one another, separate but together in glow. When you finally dismiss her to her cot in the adjoining room, you hesitate. Solitude will return once the door closes, but the warmth of her presence lingers, reminding you that even in isolation, there are threads connecting you to others. As you lie back against silk pillows, you reflect. Mistresses satisfied themselves in solitude not only with gardens, music, or beauty rituals, but also with the quiet comfort of human connection. A confidant, a servant, a trusted handmaiden could transform loneliness into something more bearable, even meaningful. And though history may forget their names, their role in shaping those solitary nights was as vital as any jewel or gown. You drift toward sleep, the sound of her faint breathing through the door reminding you, you are not entirely alone. The chamber is still, but you stir awake in the middle of the night, restless. The king is elsewhere, as he so often is, and the silence weighs heavily. You turn toward the little table near your bed, where a small wooden box waits. Its hinges creak softly as you lift the lid, and there it is, the collection of trinkets you've kept hidden from prying eyes. Tokens and keepsakes. They are not much in the eyes of the world, yet to you they are everything. Mistresses through the centuries found similar comfort in these secret hoards. Rings, portraits, ribbons, pressed flowers, even scraps of handwritten notes folded until the ink nearly vanished. They served as anchors in a life where affection was fleeting and power precarious. You lift a ring from the box, turning it over in the candlelight. It's not extravagant, just a simple band with a small engraving inside, an initial. Perhaps he gave it to you in a careless moment of charm. Perhaps it was stolen from a banquet table and pressed into your palm as a joke. To the court it would look meaningless. To you, it burns with weight. When solitude closes in, objects like this tether you to something beyond the empty bed. Historians still argue about the fate of such keepsakes. Were they hoarded like treasures, passed down secretly, or destroyed in fury when affection soured? Some accounts claim Anne of Austria burned letters in a frenzy when her lover betrayed her. Others suggest mistresses like Louise de la Vallière clung to every token, even when their love stories had ended. The truth likely lies in between, some tokens burned, some hidden, some rediscovered centuries later in dusty attics. You place the ring down gently and pick up a small miniature portrait. His eyes stare back at you, painted brighter than they are in life, softened by the artist's hand. You trace the outline of his jaw with your fingertip, though you know it is only pigment on ivory. There is a strange power in such portraits. You can scold them, whisper to them, even press them to your lips without fear of judgment. One quirky tidbit. Elizabethan women sometimes kept painted miniatures inside lockets that doubled as pomanders, holding scented herbs or even little lumps of ambergris. Imagine the mingling of memory and fragrance, love carried around like a talisman. You close your eyes and imagine the day you received this portrait. The crowd of courtiers blurred, the king's smile sharper than usual, his gift pressed into your hand with a flourish. To others it was a political gesture. To you it became private. Objects always shift depending on who holds them. To the king, the miniature was decoration. To you, it is an anchor against loneliness. At the bottom of the box lies a folded square of linen, embroidered with tiny initials. It's not yours. It's his, dropped absent-mindedly one evening after a feast. You should have returned it, but you didn't. Instead, you tucked it away, pulling it out on nights like this, running the soft fabric between your fingers. The thread is slightly frayed, and you wonder how many times he used it without thinking, never imagining it would become one of your most prized possessions. The weight of sentimentality might seem frivolous to outsiders, but in solitude it becomes survival. Each object whispers, "You are remembered, you are desired, you are part of something bigger than this lonely chamber." Without them, the walls might feel like they're closing in. With them, you stitch together a fragile tapestry of meaning. Of course, tokens can betray as much as they comfort. A maid who discovers a hidden letter can unravel an entire affair. A rival who steals a ring might display it to the court, turning your treasure into evidence. You think of poor Gabrielle d'Estrées, mistress to Henry IV of France, whose letters were intercepted and used against her. The very objects meant to sustain her solitude became weapons in political games. That risk always lurks. Even as you hold the handkerchief, you wonder if you should burn it before it burns you. Historians still debate whether the emotional attachment mistresses had to these keepsakes was exaggerated in later retellings. Were women truly that sentimental, or is this simply the lens of romance applied to their stories? Perhaps. Yet you know in your bones that when the corridors echo with emptiness, even the smallest scrap of cloth can carry immeasurable weight. You sit back, clutching the handkerchief, and remember a rumor. Some mistresses sewed keepsakes into the linings of their gowns, so they carried them even in the presence of others. You imagine walking through the grand hall with a secret pressed against your ribs, hidden beneath silk and brocade, invisible to everyone but you. That thought warms you, the idea that even in public solitude you can carry your own private fire. Objects also hold memory beyond love. A seashell from a childhood beach, a button from your first court gown, a pressed violet from a spring garden, all tokens of a self that existed before the court swallowed you. When you touch them, you remember that you are more than a mistress. You are a person with a story, a before, and maybe an after. That realization itself is a form of satisfaction. The candle sputters, its wax pooling. You tuck the objects back into the box, lingering one last time on the miniature. His painted eyes meet yours, and for a heartbeat the solitude softens. Perhaps tomorrow he will return, perhaps not. But tonight you have your keepsakes. They are small, fragile, and secret, but they are yours. You close the lid and slide the box beneath your pillow. The weight of it presses faintly against you as you lie down, a secret comfort nestled near your heart. Solitude is never fully empty when memory can be held in your hands. The little box of tokens still rests beneath your pillow when dawn finally arrives, but solitude lingers like a heavy cloak even in the light of day. By evening, the hush of the chamber begins to press too closely again, and your thoughts drift toward the strange companionship of belief, faith, superstition, ritual. Alone, a mistress could turn to these things in ways both earnest and playful, half desperate and half amused. You kneel beside the small oratory tucked into the corner of your chamber. It's modest compared to the king's chapel, but the flicker of a single candle is enough to cast the carved wooden crucifix in golden glow. You fold your hands, uncertain whether you're truly praying or only talking to yourself. Mistresses before you often did the same, seeking absolution in private while living lives that, officially, the church condemned. The paradox is almost laughable. Denounced by priests during sermons, yet whispering to the Virgin in solitude, hoping she'll listen anyway. Historians still argue about how deeply royal mistresses practiced religion. Were they sincere believers, or simply playing the part society demanded? The records are unclear. Some women, like Madame de Montespan, maintained elaborate devotional practices even while scandalizing Paris with her role beside Louis XIV. Others leaned instead into superstition, weaving charms and rituals that straddled the line between faith and magic. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, genuine yearning mixed with human contradiction. You close your eyes, whispering a half-formed prayer for patience. It feels almost ridiculous, but the act itself offers comfort. You think of the quirky detail that some mistresses carried tiny reliquaries on chains, filled with fragments of saints, bones, or splinters of the true cross. Whether they believed in the relic's power or only in the soothing act of touching them during sleepless nights, the result was the same: a way to survive solitude. On the table nearby rests a little bundle of herbs wrapped in linen. Your handmaiden slipped it there without explanation, but you know its purpose. Superstitions claimed certain plants, rosemary, rue, vervain, could ward off envy, banish nightmares, or secure fidelity. You laugh softly, wondering if the bundle is meant to keep the king faithful. If so, it's doing a poor job. Still, you breathe in its sharp scent, letting the fragrance trick your mind into calm. Court gossip tells of women consulting astrologers in secret, desperate to know when fortune would turn in their favor. Catherine de' Medici famously relied on Nostradamus, reading the stars as though they were letters written directly to her. Alone at night, you find yourself glancing upward too, searching for meaning among the constellations. Perhaps you are not so different. Perhaps every mistress in her solitude has stared into the sky asking the same question: will tomorrow bring me closer to his heart, or further from it? One particularly strange tidbit drifts back to you. It was said some mistresses smeared charms of exotic powders onto their skin, concoctions of crushed pearls, saffron, or even powdered mummy from distant lands. The logic was baffling, the results likely toxic, but the intent was clear. They were reaching for something beyond themselves, a supernatural safeguard against loneliness or decline. You chuckle, imagining yourself dusted in ancient remains just to keep a lover's eye. Solitude can drive even the most rational into odd experiments. Yet faith and superstition weren't always separate. In solitude, they tangled together. A whispered prayer might be followed by drawing a protective symbol on parchment. Lighting a candle for a saint might sit alongside tying a red thread around your wrist. You've done both. And in the stillness, when no one is watching, you admit it doesn't matter whether it's holy or heathen. What matters is that it soothes you, gives you something to do with your hands and your heart when the hours stretch endlessly. Historians still debate the sincerity of these practices. Were women like you cynically hedging their bets, or truly convinced of hidden forces shaping their lives? The question is unfair, really. Solitude breeds a kind of openness. You'll try anything that might ease the ache. Whether it's divine intervention or a sprig of rue tucked beneath your pillow, comfort is comfort. You sit back from the little altar, the candle burning low. A bead of wax slides down its side, pooling on the wood. You press your palms together, feeling the heat lingering in your skin. For a moment, the chamber doesn't feel empty at all. It feels charged, almost alive, as though invisible company lingers with you. Saints, spirits, echoes of all the women before you who prayed the same words, lit the same candles, tied the same charms. There's power in that thought. Solitude is never entirely solitary when belief connects you to an unseen chorus. You are alone, yes, but you are also part of a long, unbroken line of women whispering into the dark, hoping someone somewhere listens. As the candle flickers out, smoke curling upward like a final prayer, you climb back into bed. The linen bundle of herbs rests near your pillow, its scent sharp and reassuring. You close your eyes and let superstition do what it does best. Give shape to the shapeless, hope to the hopeless, and a little peace to the solitary heart. The faint smell of herbs lingers in your chamber from the little bundle your handmaiden left. But tonight your hands itch for something more tangible, something you can create. You rise from the bed, set aside the candle that has nearly guttered out, and open a chest near the window. Inside lies a scatter of silk threads, parchment scraps, and paints, your hidden companions, waiting for solitude to summon them. Art and craft, quiet labors that never appear in official records, were often the true solace of royal mistresses when left to themselves. You imagine the women before you, embroidering delicate flowers into handkerchiefs, sketching crude portraits, stringing beads into rosaries, even composing little plays that would never see the stage. In a world where their voices were loud only through rumor, Their hands spoke instead, weaving silence into beauty. You draw out a hoop of linen stretched taut, its blankness challenging and inviting. Threading a needle with crimson silk, you press the tip through the fabric, pulling until a petal takes shape. The rhythm is soothing, the thread slipping in and out, the flower growing with each careful stitch. It feels almost like breathing, steady and deliberate. Solitude becomes less sharp when it's filled with creation. Historians still argue about how much of the beautiful embroidery and miniature art preserved in collections today can be traced to mistresses rather than wives or noblewomen. The lines blur. Records often dismiss women's work as trivial, leaving their hands anonymous. But you can imagine Pompadour bent over a canvas, her brush tracing delicate lines of watercolor, or Nell Gwynn doodling caricatures of courtiers to amuse herself while waiting. The anonymity of history doesn't erase their presence, it only hides it under dust. There's a quirky tidbit about Louise de la Vallière, Louis XIV's mistress before Montespan. When she withdrew into a convent later in life, she filled her solitude with copying devotional texts by hand, page after painstaking page. Some scholars believe this was penance. Others suspect it was simply habit, the way her hands had always reached for creation when her heart was troubled. Either way, it shows how deeply art can become a ritual of self-soothing. You pause to stretch your fingers, flexing the stiffness from them. The tiny flower you've embroidered is uneven, its petals imperfect, but that imperfection makes it yours. Unlike jewels or gowns chosen by others, this creation belongs wholly to you. Mistresses lived much of their lives as objects of display, but here in your solitude, you are the maker, not the maid. Beside the embroidery lies a small box of pigments. You uncork one, dip a brush, and let it glide across a scrap of parchment. The paint spreads unevenly, pooling where the parchment buckles, but soon an image takes shape. The fountain in the garden you visited 2 nights ago. It's crude, childlike almost, but your heart lifts at the sight. To capture what comforts you is itself a kind of satisfaction. You laugh quietly, remembering a strange practice whispered of in court gossip, that some women painted tiny portraits of their lovers and then hid them under floorboards or inside book covers, keeping the images secret from everyone but themselves. The act was half devotion, half defiance, as though saying, "If you will not give me permanence in life, I will paint permanence myself." You can imagine yourself doing the same, stashing your crude little fountain painting in some crevice for future generations to discover, puzzling over who made it and why. Historians still debate the seriousness of these small works. Were they genuine attempts at artistry or merely idle pastimes for bored women? Yet does the question matter? To you, sitting alone with needle and brush, the importance is not in public recognition but in private comfort. Solitude without creation becomes a void. Solitude with creation becomes a space where you can hear your own voice again. The hours drift as you alternate between stitches and strokes, the embroidery blooming beside the painted parchment. You realize that what you are doing is more than passing time. You are leaving fragments of yourself, tokens that could outlast gossip and scandal. The king's affection may fade, but the flower on linen will remain, silent evidence that you existed, that you filled your solitude with something other than longing. There's comfort in that thought. You imagine future hands holding your embroidery, wondering about the woman who made it. They might never know your name, but they will feel your presence in each imperfect stitch. Perhaps that is the truest way mistresses satisfied themselves in solitude, by creating pieces of permanence in a world where their place was fleeting. The candle sputters lower, your hands ache, and you finally set aside the work. You smooth the fabric, studying the uneven flower, and tuck it into the chest once more. Tomorrow, or the next day, or the next lonely night, you'll return to it. For now, you let the satisfaction settle. Solitude does not always have to be endured. It can be shaped, molded, embroidered, painted. You crawl back beneath the covers, your fingers still stained faintly with pigment. As you close your eyes, you feel lighter. You have taken something from nothing. You have given shape to the hours, and in that quiet act, you have given shape to yourself. The embroidered flower and little sketch rest safely in your chest, waiting for another night, but this evening's solitude gnaws in a different way. Not the ache of memory, not the emptiness of silence, but the simple, primal tug of the stomach. Hunger, after all, doesn't care if you are mistress or queen, beloved or forgotten. It arrives like an impatient courtier, demanding attention. You glance toward the door where a tray has been left hours ago by a servant. The official supper, the one meant for appearances, was already taken in the great hall, all roasted pheasant and dripping venison, the air thick with sweat and garlic. But here in solitude you want something else, something indulgent, something secret. Mistresses throughout history often fed their solitude with guilty pleasures the court never saw. Midnight feasts, hidden chocolates, goblets of spiced wine sipped alone by candlelight. You cross the room and lift the linen cloth covering the tray. Beneath it lies a small treasure, candied oranges, their peels glistening with sugar crystals. You pop one into your mouth, and sweetness explodes against your tongue, sharp citrus softened by honeyed coating. You laugh softly, knowing the court preaches moderation, yet every noble keeps their own stash of indulgence. Historians still argue about how luxurious the private diets of mistresses truly were. Did they gorge themselves on delicacies nightly, or is that the invention of jealous chroniclers painting them as gluttonous? The truth, most likely, is in between. Modest meals most nights, with sudden bursts of extravagance. A dish of sugar-coated almonds here, a sip of imported wine there. Enough to feel decadent in solitude, even when the king's banquet table was elsewhere. You lift a goblet of red wine, warming it in your hands. The scent rises, dark berries, a hint of spice and maybe cinnamon added by the kitchens. You imagine Madame de Pompadour sipping chocolate instead, for it was said she adored it so much she had it prepared specially, foamy and thick, laced with exotic vanilla. A quirky tidbit whispers through your memory. In the 17th century, some courts even believed chocolate was an aphrodisiac, served in porcelain cups with gilded handles. You smile, half tempted to request it tomorrow, just to see if it dulls the edge of solitude. You carry the tray to the bed and sit cross-legged, a secret picnic laid across the coverlet. Grapes, bread still warm from the ovens, a slice of soft cheese that smells faintly of the countryside. You tear the bread, spread the cheese, and savor each bite as though the act itself is a rebellion. Alone, there is no need for dainty gestures, no fear of watching eyes. You can lick sugar from your fingers, sip wine greedily, and laugh at the absurd formality of public meals. Yet indulgence is not only about food. It is about the small rebellions that turn solitude into satisfaction. You remember a story about Nell Gwynn, the witty actress turned mistress of Charles II, who was said to enjoy roasted apples at her own hearth, laughing with servants late into the night. No gold platter, no courtly etiquette, just the comfort of something warm and sweet. You wonder if that was the truest form of luxury, not diamonds, but freedom to eat and drink as you pleased. Historians still debate whether such tales of indulgence were exaggerated to make mistresses seem frivolous. But you know better. Loneliness breeds appetite, not only of the heart but of the stomach. Food fills the hollows that longing leaves behind. And in these midnight feasts, mistresses claimed a little power over their own lives. You peel another candied orange, sucking the syrup from your fingers. Your mind drifts to the kitchen below, the scurrying of servants, the clatter of pots, the fires roaring even at this late hour. Entire lives unfold in those cellars, unseen from the gilded chambers above. The bread in your hands carries the labor of dozens, yet here in your solitude, it feels like it belongs to you alone. A candle flickers, its flame casting shadows across the walls. The tray now holds only crumbs, and you lean back, full in both belly and spirit. The feast has softened the sharpness of solitude, turned it into something almost playful. You remember another quirky detail. Some women, bored and restless, composed little rhymes about their midnight indulgences, scrawling them in margins of prayer books. Imagine the scandal if a courtier discovered such a thing. Her Majesty's mistress writes odes to figs. Yet in the quiet of your chamber, you understand the impulse. Eating alone can feel like writing a secret poem with your mouth. You drain the last sip of wine, warmth blooming in your chest. There is guilt, of course. Indulgence always carries it, but guilt itself can be part of the pleasure. You think of those who might scorn you if they knew, and it makes you laugh again. Let them scorn. Let them whisper. Tonight you are content, sugar on your lips and a soft hum in your veins. As you settle the tray aside, you realize solitude is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is permission to eat, to drink, to indulge without restraint. The court will never see this side of you, and perhaps that is the greatest satisfaction. Some secrets are sweetest when they remain your own. You lie back against the pillows, the taste of candied fruit still on your tongue. Solitude has been fed, satisfied for now, not by love but by the simplest of pleasures, food and drink savored without witnesses. The last trace of sugar fades from your tongue, but solitude has other cravings beyond the feast of the stomach. Once the body is fed, the mind demands its own banquet, and so you reach for the objects scattered across your chamber that promise escape into realms far removed from courtly duties or the king's inconsistent affections. On the small writing desk rests a volume bound in worn leather, its spine cracked from many hands turning its pages before yours. Books in your age are treasures, often copied by monks or ambitious scholars, but mistresses, favored, well-kept, and often educated beyond the norm, could gain access to them more easily than most women of their time. You open it gently, the parchment whispering as you fan the leaves, and suddenly the silence of your chamber is filled with voices. Philosophers, poets, even heretics who dared put quill to page. Historians still argue whether royal mistresses truly spent much time reading, or whether later writers embellished their intellects to defend their influence. Yet records of Anne Boleyn's personal prayer book, with her notes scribbled in margins, hint that many women in your position were not only lovers but thinkers. And what better way to satisfy solitude than to slip into other minds across centuries? You stretch across the bed with the book propped against your knees. Tonight it might be Ovid's Metamorphoses, filled with gods who transform and lovers who chase shadows. Another night it could be a collection of French verses, where troubadours sing of longing that sounds suspiciously like your own. Every page is a mirror, sometimes flattering, sometimes cruel. You find yourself smiling when a passage describes a woman who resists kings with wit sharper than steel. Would that be you, if you dare? A quirky tidbit comes to you. Some women in courts were said to paste four-leaf clovers or pressed violets inside their books, believing the pages carried luck. You imagine slipping a flower between two chapters of Ovid, closing the cover, and letting the plant's spirit mingle with the story. Solitude invites these whimsical gestures, small rituals that no chronicler ever bothers to record. Beyond books, there are paints and threads, the quieter arts that fill hours with color. On your table lies a hoop of embroidery, the fabric stretched taut, a half-finished rose blooming beneath your needle. You pick it up, the metal tip gleaming in candlelight. Each stitch is a heartbeat, pulling you deeper into concentration. The court may gossip about lovers and politics, but they seldom note the patient hours spent with silk thread, turning loneliness into gardens stitched on linen. Embroidery was more than pastime, it was language. Some women stitched secret initials into their patterns, lovers, names disguised in vines. Others favored certain flowers, violets for modesty, pansies for thought. Historians still debate whether such symbolism was deliberate or invented by romantics centuries later. But when you guide the needle, you like to think every color whispers. Tonight, the rose is not only a rose, it is your unspoken confession, blooming in silence. And then there is music. Against the wall leans a small lute, polished wood glowing softly. You rise, pluck it into your lap, and let your fingers wander across strings. At first it is awkward, the sound twanging, but soon melody trickles out, filling the chamber with something alive. You hum, your voice low, a song half remembered from the kitchens below. Music is indulgence of the soul, and in solitude it becomes intimate, as though the notes are lovers themselves, pressing close, keeping you company. Historians still argue whether mistresses were trained musicians or merely dabblers. Yet diaries suggest many could at least sing, if not play, and music was often their private solace. You think of Madame de Montespan, remembered for her sharp wit, yet also noted as a patron of musicians. Perhaps she too once strummed a quiet chord in her chamber, filling absence with sound. You set the lute aside, the last note trembling in the air like a sigh. The chamber feels less lonely now, alive with echoes of pages, threads, and strings. And yet your eyes drift to the small box on the table, a chest of curiosities collected over years. Trinkets really, each with its own story. A seashell gifted by a visiting merchant, its spirals smelling faintly of salt even now. A polished stone shaped like a heart, found in the palace garden. A feather once dropped by a parrot, belonging to some foreign envoy. Quirky, ridiculous treasures, yet each one an anchor. You lift the feather, tickle it against your cheek, and laugh at your own foolishness. But these little indulgences keep solitude from hardening into despair. Every mistress, you suspect, gathers a similar collection, objects too silly for display yet too precious to discard. The public sees jewels and gowns, but the private soul clings to seashells. Another thought flits across your mind. The debate over whether such hobbies were dismissed by men as trivial or whether they secretly envied the quiet power of women creating worlds within chambers. Mere embroidery, some would scoff, yet in those threads you weave defiance. Mere trinkets, they'd sneer, but each shell and stone is a memory the king cannot command. Historians still argue where to place these acts, art, rebellion, or simply boredom. Perhaps they are all three. The night deepens. The book lies open beside you, the embroidery hoop rests at your side, the lute hums in silence, and the feather glimmers faintly in the candlelight. Alone, yes, but not empty. You have turned solitude into a gallery, a concert, a garden stitched with roses, a library of voices whispering through the dark. You stretch across the bed, gazing at the ceiling beams where shadows dance. You wonder if future centuries will ever understand these moments. Will they think you merely languished, waiting for the king's return? Or will they sense the richness hidden in your solitude, the arts and objects that satisfied the self when the court looked elsewhere? Another stitch, another note, another page. These are the quiet rebellions that mistresses left behind, woven into margins of history. And tonight, as you close your eyes, you know that solitude can be fed not only with food but with beauty, imagination, and the simple joy of creating when no one is watching. The lute rests silent against the wall, the book lies half open on the coverlet, and the last rose stitched into linen waits for its final petal. But tonight, your solitude demands something more spirited, something that blurs the hard edges of thought. You move toward the small cabinet tucked discreetly in the corner, its wood carved with vines and griffins. Inside it rests the mistress's true companion, bottles of liquid comfort. The court pretends to adore moderation. Physicians lecture about balanced humors, warning against excess of wine or ale. Yet you know how those same physicians sip generously behind closed doors. In solitude, no rules matter. You uncork a slender flask, the smell of fortified wine rising like spiced air. You pour it into a goblet, and suddenly your chamber feels less like a prison and more like a private tavern. Historians still argue how freely women of the court indulged in drink. Some claim they were kept on strict codes, forbidden from drunkenness, while others whisper of evenings where mistresses rivaled the king's own capacity. Somewhere between lies the truth, quiet sipping, punctuated by rare nights of reckless abandon. You taste the wine dark, heavy, staining your lips like velvet. It warms quickly, softening your limbs, smoothing your thoughts. The candlelight blurs ever so slightly, each flicker becoming a dance. And with each sip, you feel the solitude shift from sharp loneliness into gentle intoxication. A quirky tidbit drifts through your mind. Catherine de' Medici was rumored to bring exotic liqueurs from Italy into France, blending herbs and sugar to create drinks that courtiers found both medicinal and dangerously addictive. Some mistresses might have toyed with such concoctions, half believing in their healing powers, half enjoying the way they lit fire through the veins. Perhaps you, too, could persuade the kitchens to experiment. Rosewater honey, maybe a dash of something scandalous like cinnamon. You imagine Madame de Pompadour, always elegant, raising a porcelain cup of hot chocolate laced with rum, giggling softly as she let the world dissolve for a while. And then you imagine Nell Gwynn, the king's witty actress, guzzling ale straight from the jug with servants around the hearth, laughter ringing through smoke and shadows. Two women, two styles, but both finding satisfaction in drink when solitude demanded a balm. You set down the goblet, feeling the warmth spread from chest to fingertips. You rise unsteadily and twirl once, skirts brushing against your calves. The room becomes your stage. You bow to the empty air, curtsy to the wall, and laugh at the absurdity of it all. What is a mistress if not both performer and audience in her own chamber? Drink only loosens the curtain. Historians still debate whether mistresses used alcohol as escape or empowerment. Was it a way to dull sorrow or a way to claim pleasure in a life so tightly controlled? Perhaps both. The drink lets you slip momentarily into a world without duty, without judgment. And maybe that is its most dangerous magic, the ability to make solitude feel like freedom. You refill the goblet, heavier this time, and sit cross-legged on the floor. The cool stone beneath you contrasts with the warmth coursing through your veins. You remember a strange tale. Some noblewomen of the Renaissance supposedly mixed ground pearls into wine, believing it enhanced beauty. The thought makes you snort into your cup. Imagine spending a fortune only to swallow crushed jewels. Yet, in a way, isn't that what court life is? Consuming beauty for the sake of appearance. You lean back against the bed, tipsy now, watching shadows ripple across the ceiling. Shapes form. Dragons, ships, faces you almost recognize. You giggle and whisper greetings to them. Solitude no longer feels empty. It is crowded with half-imagined guests, all summoned by candlelight and wine. You raise your goblet in a toast, not caring that no one answers. Another sip and the mind wanders deeper. You think of forgotten mistresses, those whose names barely survived in records, erased because they bore no children, plotted no intrigue, stirred no scandal. Did they, too, sit in chambers with a cup of wine, whispering to shadows? Historians may argue endlessly about their influence, but you suspect their truest stories lie in moments like this, tipsy, laughing alone, savoring the taste of forbidden freedom. The goblet empties again, and you stretch across the floor, cheek pressed against stone coolness. The world tilts pleasantly, like a boat rocking on gentle water. Your solitude is no longer sharp or dull. It is liquid, flowing, wrapping you in warmth. And yet a whisper of caution lingers. Too much indulgence, and tomorrow you will face headaches, dry lips, and the sharp eyes of rivals eager to mock your weakness. Drink is both balm and trap. Historians still argue whether mistresses who overindulged ruined their influence, or whether kings themselves found it amusing, even endearing. Either way, the line between satisfaction and scandal is razor thin. You push the goblet away, laughing at your own restraint. Tonight, just enough. Tomorrow, perhaps more. For solitude does not vanish, it only transforms. And sometimes, with the right drink, it transforms into laughter, song, and a dance with shadows across the chamber walls. The candle sputters, nearly spent. You climb into bed, heavy-limbed, the warmth still humming in your blood. Solitude has been softened once again, not conquered but seduced by the simple pleasure of wine and imagination. You sigh, closing your eyes as though the chamber itself hums with you. The wine has faded from your veins, leaving a soft heaviness in its wake. The candle on the table has burned low, wax pooled like a small lake around its base. Yet sleep does not come. That is the curse of solitude. Sometimes indulgence fills the belly, soothes the mind, warms the body, and still the heart refuses to rest. You lie back against the pillows, eyes wide in the darkness, and listen to the castle breathe. The corridors creak, beams shift, my scurry behind the wainscoting. Somewhere faintly, a guard coughs into the night air. The sound of the world going on without you presses against your chamber walls. Loneliness, uninvited, slinks back into the room, curling like smoke at the foot of your bed. And so, you turn to the last and perhaps most powerful tool in your arsenal, imagination. Mistresses throughout history have known this trick. When solitude presses too sharply, you invent company, a fantasy lover who never strays, a conversation that never ends, a stage upon which you play every role from queen to servant without fear of judgment. You close your eyes and the chamber dissolves. In its place rises a garden at midnight, moonlight pooling across marble statues, roses blooming unnaturally bright in silver glow. You walk barefoot on damp grass, hair loose about your shoulders. No king summons you, no rival eyes you with jealousy. You belong to yourself entirely. Historians still argue whether mistresses relied on such inner worlds or whether we, centuries later, project modern ideas of fantasy onto them. But diaries and letters hint at it, lines scribbled about dreams of elsewhere or imagined company when the court was asleep. Such fragments suggest that when reality grew too narrow, women widened it with their own minds. You wander deeper into the dream garden. A figure waits at the fountain, faceless yet familiar, offering a hand. You take it and suddenly loneliness vanishes. You laugh softly at the absurdity, inventing a lover when you already serve as one. But here, in this imagined space, you are not waiting to be chosen. You are the chooser. A quirky tidbit comes to you. Some medieval women kept dream journals, believing that writing down nightly visions allowed them to control what came the next evening. Imagine mistresses secretly steering their own fantasies, planting seeds for sweeter solitude. Perhaps you, too, could keep such a book beside your bed, though if anyone found it, scandal would bloom faster than roses in spring. Back in your chamber, the flicker of the dying candle casts shapes on the wall. You let them morph into companions. A shadow stretches long and thin, becoming a courtier bowing at your feet. Another curls round like a cat, purring silently as it curls at the foot of the bed. You smile, amused by your own inventions. Solitude teaches creativity, if nothing else. But imagination does not stop at lovers or pets. It expands to whole worlds. You picture yourself not in a castle, but aboard a ship, sails snapping in the wind, hair flying loose as salt spray kisses your face. You are no mistress there. No, you are captain, shouting orders, charting unknown waters. The men obey without question, and no king dares to call you back. Historians still debate whether such daydreams held real power. Did they help women survive the weight of their gilded cages, or were they fleeting illusions, leaving bitterness once the candle was snuffed? Perhaps both. Yet tonight, in your chamber, the imagined voyage feels as real as the bed beneath you. You picture another scene, walking through a crowded marketplace disguised in plain wool. Nobody recognizes you. You haggle over figs, laugh with merchants, slip coins into a beggar's palm. The thrill of freedom sparks in your chest. In solitude, you become anyone you wish, far freer than you ever are in daylight. The candle gutters lower. You roll onto your side, pulling the blanket close, still half lost in your imagined wanderings. A strange memory surfaces, a tale of Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, who traveled with her husband through Ottoman lands and described Turkish baths with vivid detail. You grin, imagining her stepping from marble steam rooms, dripping water and scandalizing English readers. Perhaps imagination sometimes stretches into curiosity, until eventually it pushes women beyond the chamber walls into real adventure. But for now, your adventures remain safe within your mind. You whisper to yourself, narrating as though you were a heroine in a story. She wandered through moonlit gardens, sailed across endless seas, laughed in crowded markets, and found herself utterly free. The words feel silly, indulgent, yet satisfying. You chuckle softly at your own theatrics. Who needs a chronicler when you can be your own bard? Historians still argue whether mistresses left behind enough traces of their inner worlds. So many were reduced to caricatures: temptress, schemer, betrayer. But you suspect each had her own private theater, staging plays no one else ever saw. Tonight, you are audience and actress, playwright and critic, all rolled into one. You nestle deeper into the bed, letting the fantasy soften into dream. The faceless lover at the fountain waits patiently, The ship still sails on the horizon. The marketplace hums with voices you almost hear. Solitude has not left you. It has simply changed costume, become something you can dance with instead of something that crushes. A candle sputters one last time, then dies, leaving only darkness. But your imagination glows brighter than flame, carrying you gently towards sleep. You sigh, content. For tonight, you have satisfied solitude not with jewels or feasts, not with music or wine, but with the simplest and most powerful indulgence of all, the freedom to dream. The chamber lies in darkness now, the last candle gone, but your mind still drifts between sleep and waking. Solitude lingers, soft as a shawl draped across your shoulders, and yet it no longer feels like a punishment. Tonight you have feasted, stitched, strummed, drunk, and dreamed. You have satisfied hunger, curiosity, imagination, and loneliness in turn. But perhaps the deepest satisfaction is this: the quiet knowledge that you, a mistress defined so often by others, hold a private world no king or court can command. You turn over on the bed, listening to the faint heartbeat of the castle. Footsteps echo far below, maybe a servant finishing their rounds. A dog barks once in the courtyard, then silence swallows it whole, and you breathe, steady and calm. The night is nearly gone, dawn only hours away. Yet before sleep comes fully, your solitude invites one last indulgence: reflection. Mistresses throughout history lived on edges, adored yet envied, pampered yet precarious, influential yet vulnerable. The world remembers them for scandal, for beauty, for whispers of political sway. But what about these quiet nights? The long hours where no king entered, no banquet summoned, no courtier begged favor. Historians still argue whether mistresses wielded true power or were merely pawns in royal games. But here, in solitude, you know the truth lies not in politics but in resilience. The daily acts of surviving, even thriving, when the world looked away. You stretch out, staring into darkness. You think of others who came before and those who will come after. Some left marks carved deep into history. Diane de Poitiers, lover of Henry II, who wore black and white long after his death, her grief stitched into every gown. Others faded into obscurity, remembered only in footnotes or scandalous pamphlets. But all of them, you suspect, shared these private hours. They all had to find ways to fill silence, to soothe longing, to craft satisfaction out of solitude. A quirky tidbit floats through your memory. In some courts, mistresses were rumored to keep pet monkeys, little creatures dressed in silks, companions against loneliness. You laugh softly in the dark, imagining one tugging at your sleeve, stealing candied almonds from your tray. What would history make of such a detail if it survived? Perhaps it would be dismissed as frivolity. Yet you know the truth: companionship, even from a mischievous animal, might have meant the difference between despair and delight. You sigh, shifting beneath the blanket. The chamber smells faintly of wax and wine, embroidery thread, and the sweetness of candied fruit. Each scent anchors you to the evening, reminding you how you transformed emptiness into richness. Historians might debate endlessly about your public role, but they will never know the small victories of nights like this. The joy of licking sugar from your fingers without etiquette, the thrill of strumming a lute badly yet freely, the comfort of inventing a faceless lover in a dream garden. The debate will never end. Some will argue mistresses were victims of circumstance, women used by kings and discarded when novelty wore off. Others will insist they were powerful figures, shaping politics from behind silken curtains. But neither view captures these moments: the whispered laughter, the secret picnics, the fantasy spun in darkness. Perhaps the real power of a mistress lay not in swaying kings, but in surviving solitude, in satisfying themselves when no one else cared to. Your eyelids grow heavier. You trace a finger over the embroidered rose beside you, the stitches slightly rough against your skin. The rose is imperfect like your story, but it is yours. That perhaps is the greatest satisfaction of all, claiming something private, beyond the reach of gossip or history's pen. Sleep creeps closer. You let the last of your thoughts drift outward, soft and unhurried. You imagine the faceless lover smiling at the fountain, the ship still sailing toward horizons unseen, the marketplace alive with scents of figs and spice. You imagine every mistress before you, scattered through centuries, each in her chamber, each whispering to shadows, each finding her own way to be satisfied in solitude. And then at last you surrender. Solitude does not vanish. It simply melts into dream where you are always free, always whole, always more than mistress. And now, as our journey through these long and secret nights draws to a close, let's slow everything down. The castle walls, once heavy with silence, fade into something softer, like mist rolling across a still meadow. The flickering candles are gone, the food trays clear, the loot resting silent, the embroidery folded neatly away. What remains is only a gentle hush, a quiet steady enough to carry you towards sleep. Picture yourself now, not as a mistress locked within history's gaze, but simply as a soul at rest. The bed beneath you is warm, the blanket tucked close, the chamber cool but comforting. You breathe in slowly, letting your chest rise and fall like a calm tide, steady, even unhurried. Imagine the echoes of tonight's story fatting like ripples on water. The secret feasts, the whispered laughter, the shadowed dreams, all of it dissolves into stillness. What lingers is only peace, a soft whisper reminding you that even in solitude, you are never truly alone. Countless lives before yours have walked these paths, felt these long hours, and found ways to fill them with light. Let your body grow heavier, your mind lighter. Drift with the thought that solitude itself can be a kind of companion, one that holds space for reflection, for play, for rest. Allow it to cradle you now, gently, safely, as you slip further into dream. And so, dear listener, we end here at the edge of night, with the hush of history behind us and the promise of sleep ahead. Close your eyes, let the last threads of the story unwind and rest well. Sweet dreams.